slide 5 in our Imperialism unit here. Let's finish up the war here, the Spanish-American War. And to do that, we have to go back to Cuba. Okay? The United States kind of does things backwards here. We declare war and then realize, oh, crap, now we have to get ready to fight the war. Ideally, you'd like to be prepared to fight the war when you declare war, but we weren't. The United States was ill-prepared to fight this battle. Our Navy had been built up. It was good. Our Army, not so much. Soldiers are sent to do battle in Cuba in heavy woolen uniforms. Remember, the last fighting we had done had been with the Indians on the plains, and wool uniforms on the plains in winter are great. Heavy wool uniforms in a tropical island in the summer are not so great. We didn't have enough food, we didn't have enough weapons, we didn't have enough of anything when we declared war. Really, the only thing we had going for us was that the Spanish were less prepared than we were. They were a declining power, just waiting to be wiped out. So we do them the favor and do that. But we were not prepared to fight this battle. Right? And it is in the middle of all of that that Teddy Roosevelt will ride in to save the day. If you'll recall, Teddy founds his own cavalry regiment, the Rough Riders. Remember, once war is declared and we're actually fighting, he doesn't want to be stuck at a desk job, so he steps down from Assistant Secretary of the Navy, forms his own cavalry regiment, meaning cavalry fights on horseback, okay? And names himself a colonel in the regiment. He's not in charge of it, but he is an officer in it. Okay? The Rough Riders are made up of, they get the name because, not that they're not good riders, they're rough at riding, just because they're a bunch of rough guys. They're made up primarily of, it's a volunteer regiment, you could sign up for it. There were cowboys, ex-convicts who were looking for anything after they get out of prison, ex-polo players that Roosevelt knew from his days growing up in money of New York. Polo players obviously are good horsemen. So it's this weird collection of soldiers that turns out to be very good. The Rough Riders are a really good cavalry unit, and they do the country and Teddy proud. Their greatest victory will come on the island of Cuba, fighting the Spanish, at what's known as the Battle of San Juan Hill. This is their one great victory in the Spanish-American War. They take not only San Juan Hill, but the neighboring hill, Kettle Hill, like a tea kettle, in the war. And from the top of these hills, there are forts up there that they capture. You can command really the entire island from there, both shores at least. You put some cannon up there, you can control anything going on either shore. So the Battle of San Juan Hill is a very important one. It's also a very ironic one, because in the ultimate of ironies, you see in the picture here, this painting, a famous painting from the Battle of San Juan Hill. There's Teddy charging up the hill, leading his men into battle. But you'll notice that Teddy's the only one on horseback. In the ultimate of ironies, the Rough Riders cavalry unit, meaning they fight on horseback, won their greatest victory on foot. That's why everybody else in the painting here is charging up the hill on foot. As I said, we were not prepared to fight this war. We didn't have enough ships. The Rough Riders' horses had not yet arrived in Cuba. They got there, but their horses didn't. So it was time for the battle to begin. They had no horses, so they make the charge on foot. So, irony of ironies here. The Rough Riders' greatest victory comes as rough walkers, I guess you could say. The Navy will finish off the Spanish Armada. Armada is just the Spanish word for their navy. We wiped out half of it in the Philippines will wipe out the rest of it at the Battle of Santiago Harbor in Cuba. So we had the Battle of Manila Bay in the Philippines and Santiago Harbor in Cuba. The Spanish are wiped out. Their navy is gone. They are killed or captured on the island of Cuba and are forced to surrender. Right? Now, before the war could end and Spain sign the peace treaty, the U.S. quickly moves to capture another Caribbean island that was a colony of Spain's, Puerto Rico. There was even less resistance in Puerto Rico than in Cuba. There wasn't a lot in Cuba, but even less in Puerto Rico, so it's even easier to take than Cuba was. Here at the bottom, you see this picture of these riflemen training. This is a U.S. volunteer regiment made up of Kentucky soldiers getting ready to fight in what they called Puerto Rico. Most of these men had probably never even been out of Kentucky, much less out of the country, so they didn't know where they were going to fight. They just knew they were going to fight somewhere, someplace called Puerto Rico. So we have a local connection here to the Spanish-American War. Okay. Now, the war here will claim some lives, as most wars do, and wars will always be judged in terms of, how many men died fighting it. 400 Americans were killed in fighting in Cuba. None in Spain, in the Philippines. But in Cuba, 400 Americans were killed in Cuba in fighting. The Spanish killed 400 Americans. But over 5,000 Americans died. Over 5,000 Americans were killed by disease in Cuba. It is a tropical region. Disease spreads very quickly. Diseases such as malaria, typhoid, yellow fever was the biggest one that we had to deal with. Food poisoning. We had, thanks to the Industrial Revolution, all this new technology, we were canning beef and vegetables, but particularly canning beef to send to the soldiers. These new tin cans. Problem is, the tin in the cans was contaminating the beef inside. So a lot of the soldiers that ate the beef contracted food poisoning, which led to a disease called dysentery. And dysentery is basically death by diarrhea. You poop yourself to death. It's a horrible way to die, I would imagine. But ultimately, what you die from is dehydration. You cannot even keep water in your system, thanks to this food poisoning that the soldiers had contracted. Bacteria in their intestinal systems, they couldn't keep water down even, and dehydrated. So dysentery has to be a disgusting way to die. But over 5,000 Americans die. Close to 5,500, 400 from disease and just over 5,000, 400 from fighting, just over 5,000 killed by disease. Right? So the war ends, Spain surrenders. Let's see what we get out of this war in our next slide.